Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, it is our favorite format, a short jam session on a topic which is near and dear to all of our hearts, multi-cluster Kubernetes. So joining us today are Tom Nadeau, Carl Mestry, as usual, but our very special guest, Anil. Over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey Dave, thanks. My name is Anil Vishnoi. I'm part of Red Hat CTO office, and I'm working like Kyle, Tom, and Dave is doing, trying to make one packet reach from point A to point B, and we are trying, different way to do that. So, and I'm doing this from last 15 years. Partly I did in research. Then I did in dev environments, working with telcos. So I have seen all the spectrum from research, how it works, to all the way to dev and operation, how it works. So three entirely different world, and I kind of dabble with all of them. So, and recently I'm kind of looking at a few of the networking use cases, multi-cluster networking, specific workload aware CNIs, like for edge deployments, looking at service mesh and how you can kind of improve the performance of that. And mostly, and center of this is like technology like eBPF, which I'm trying to learn, see how it can help in all of these use cases. But today we can specifically talk about the multi-cluster use case, which is like very interesting one from three perspectives. It's like I look at them, it's like, this is very interesting problem in the sense, you have end user in this because they view the multi-cluster in different way. Then you have networking part of it, which is very interesting in the sense you can realize that use case in multiple ways, and that's not making your life easy. And the third thing is operation part of it. It's like at the end of this, who is going to manage it and how they are going to manage it. So
isn't that the tricky part with this? Your mileage varies in each three of those areas.
Yeah, and the thing is, at this point, I don't think so they clearly understand each other because everybody thinks their role is very important, right? So user comes and say, yeah, this is what I want. I want very simplistic stuff, but I want it to be performant.
Do you think that comes from like the Kubernetes ethos, which was like what you just said, like let's simplify everything so that,
Hold on. Did we just use Kubernetes? No one should use Kubernetes and simplify in the same sentence. I mean, really?
Yeah, you invoked the wrong adjective.
They seem to be at odds with each other,
It's the opposite, right? It's like anytime they announce simplify, they really mean complicate by adding a new component. So
I keep hearing this whole thing again and again. Let's make networking simple. I heard it when the OpenFlow came. I heard it now with eBPF. Well, they're not saying is make it simple because they know that it's not simple as of now. But we need to make it simple.
The want and the reality are different, right?
So yeah, the want and reality. It's like you start with, it's like, I do gardening, and the technology I see is like my daughter. Okay, so when you kind of put a seed in, she'll be happy to put a seed and put a water on it, and the first plant come out, she'll be very happy. Okay, and then she leaves. She don't care about growing it. She don't care about maintaining it. She don't care.
We were talking about this last time, right? It's like the fun and sexy stuff versus the pragmatic, like it has to work stuff in this space they're different.
That's the thing, right? It's like when people say, right, it's like when the rubber hole hits the road, that experience comes very later. People kind of jump on the waves. So as you know my background, I was like started with OpenFlow, and I was like in that bandwagon, and I was like super excited about these things and all that. And we were looking at all the positive motivations towards this. Right now, I'm looking at more like an operational aspect of it. I think that's what I learned from this thing, whether you can deploy and make it work in a production or not. And start with enterprise networking kind of a thing, right? You work there and you try to see whether things works there or not, and then you go to telco kind of environment, which is more strict
And is
when
it
it comes to
different?
networking requirement. Yeah, and that's always. I
Or is
never
it
felt that both same. So it's like, I after working with telco so much, I started being like, yeah, I think I should spend more time on enterprise side of it. Life will
yeah.
be a little bit easier for me. So, so yeah, it's like we worked through is like hard. We build open flow kind of stuff, and and then we deploy it in telco environment. It took us 3 years to deploy it,
Yeah. It's a
and
different animal, right?
recently they started using it, and I was like, okay, now new technology is coming. So, but I'm excited about eBPF for sure. But I'm looking at from very skeptical lens in terms of operations, production deployments, and all those kind of a thing. Back to multi-cluster story, right? So that's where I'm kind of eBPF is one part of it. We are looking at a solution as a networking level to be eBPF based because we wanted to build, new gateways and we need those network capabilities, and we are thinking explore eBPF for that. But that is one part of the story. Probably we'll talk sometime later on that. But
Yep.
multi-cluster story, what I've seen is uh, there's no clear definition of it. It's
It's kind
like
of
you
a
have a
cluster all on its own. Yeah.
yeah, those two services are running, let's see, and then you want to connect it. There are like a number of patterns there, how you want to
Right.
connect
And
it.
it also depends where. That's the other thing,
Yeah,
right? It's not a shiny data center in a, high powered area with good cooling situation and easy access and
I don't think so. Kubernetes, developers know that these things run in data center. They they think it's all in cloud, and they don't know cloud run in a data center,
right.
and they
It's
need
out in the
networking,
cloud,
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So the cloud actually gave them that perception that you go and basically do, because the cloud, they hide your networking, right? But when it comes to hybrid cloud scenario where you have a private data center under you and you want to kind of do networking, things get tricky. For
Yeah.
me, when we were looking at this problem, in collaboration with, our parent company, it's like we're trying to see how this problem can be defined in a way, what we see by multi-cluster networking, what the user thinks about this thing. Because users abstraction is a very high level. Then you come down, you can do this solution by doing layer 4 networking or layer 2 or layer 3 networking, and you can build two different products
Or
that
all of
can
the
make
above.
these kind of networking, and
Yeah.
and go L7 and voila, you are done. It's like just matter of routing your HTTP request from one place to another place. That's what it boils down to, right?
Well,
But
so Anil,
the spectrum
it,
of Mhm.
so is the multi-cluster about trying to solve the problem where I have an application that's so giant it can't fit in one Kubernetes cluster? Because one thing with this whole multi-cluster, I don't understand if it's a practical problem, or in other words, if it's like a solution that's looking for a problem.
Yeah.
That's the
Like,
part I
can't
don't
you
get,
just
right?
make the
it's
cluster
Because
bigger, you know?
yeah, well, or yeah, is managing these clusters is a lot of heavyweight effort too. So why do I want more of them, or what is the application I'm putting in that's so huge that it needs multiple cluster? Or this is the part I don't quite
Yeah,
understand.
what
If
is
it's
it? Is this like your redundancy story? Is this your
yeah,
what scale story? I don't
so
know. It's hard to,
so
yeah.
so this is like a partially practical. And then once you have a practical statement, then you try to, put more motivation on these. And the additional motivation are all theoretical motivations. Okay.
Hmm.
And now you have two variables here. One is your cluster size. You know, you can't assume that your cluster is going to be 1,000 node cluster. There are clouds who basically spawn a small cluster and put your application on top of it, and that's it. Just, one box fit this application, just spawn that much, and that's you are good to go, right? The practical aspect was like you have a multiple cluster, you have a services running, and you want to connect them. So there's two different services, and you want to consume service A, want to consume to service B. It's like a general problem when it comes to multi-cluster, and that's the real motivation. You want to connect two services, right, which is across the data center. Now, the one that you were talking about, Kyle, is like spilling the whole, application to another cluster is a possibility, and you can do that if you implement the solution for connecting these two services. So that is like a side effect, or it's like with a little bit of more tweaking, you can realize that use case also. Why people are doing this thing is like you have a data center and then you have a cluster there, and you can't expand it. Okay, but your application is running this. What is the other ways? Create a bigger cluster somewhere and migrate it. Or you basically say, no, don't do that. And you create another cluster and try to spill all your workload and scale it on the other cluster and try to stitch that east-west traffic, right? So as I said, this is the problem statement is just not one, two clusters. The cluster definition also varies here. Cluster is not your just Kubernetes cluster. You want to connect services which can run on VMs,
It might be
which can
running on
run
a old mainframe
some
or
server
something.
somewhere.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
server.
that
Yeah,
workload is running
exactly.
somewhere. And surprisingly, I was like, seriously, those are really use cases. But to my surprise, there are a lot of workload that is sitting on those old infrastructure platform. I won't
Yeah.
call OpenStack old, but still, the OpenStack is still reasonable platform to have a workload on. But then you
But
basically
that's a
have
good use case where you have like stack and then you've got new stuff on a cluster in Kubernetes, right? And you've got some new version of the thing or a complementary service. This is the fundamental problem you're getting at, right? Like
yeah.
even a multi-cluster isn't the solution. You do like multiple types of applications. That's why the thing I was working on with, the using a message bus and et cetera to stitch things together, that was the solution to that exactly. Because
Yeah.
what if it can't run in a cluster? What if it's, I've got some Cobalt thing I'm running over here, right?
But
The challenge comes in is like, yeah, they were saying something.
yeah, I was going to say, like, this is a problem which has been there since the dawn of time, like from the time that I taught the mainframe to talk OSPF so that we didn't have to have static routes to access services there.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and there was this wonderful thing called DNS, which seemed to solve a lot of these problems, right? The services from Stack get advertised via DNS and are reachable from Kubernetes because of this magical thing called DNS. So, like,
But then
what?
what Anil's talking about too, like operationally, this sounds fun in theory, but who's
Yeah,
going to run this thing?
that's another challenge. And the thing is it's kind of hard to make understand, right? The platform to platform variance, unless you work with all of these platforms, it's very hard to people to understand different world how things working. The nature of these platform itself is very, very different. If you look at both provides a one virtualized environment to run stuff, but if you look at the OpenStack, the creation of a VM and deletion of the VM is like what within you talk it 1 minute rate. 1 minute there's what 5 or 10, depend on the size of the cluster. But when it comes to the container world, applications and containers goes away like within a seconds, right? Your endpoints be there, they can scale out, shrink anytime. There are a lot of automation in terms of how many containers can be there and they can shrink anytime. So every time container goes away or come back, it's one network interface card, you hook to the network and you want them to be connected, right? So the workload on the Kubernetes side and the rate of change is super high when it comes to Kubernetes, but on OpenStack is less. But then you try to scale out solution and they say, why you want to scale out this way? Because your Kubernetes won't be able to handle it. So it's like always the open question is, can you write one single solution to kind of do that? Or is really make sense to kind of you stitch all of these different platform and services together? Or you just say, stop it and say, this solution is just for Kubernetes. This is for, OpenStack, and let's figure out some simple internet-based way to connect these services. You don't really want a dedicated
That's like a
solution. Just use
perfect
that.
opening for like the long form version of this conversation, because you
Agreed.
just opened it right there. Right.
So yeah, a lot of variables, and I have worked with a lot of team members also to kind of brainstorm about this thing. But what I have seen is you have to start small, but with a big vision, because these use cases, the additional problems are like application wants somebody, application owner, developer, they would look at it a different way. Networking solution provider look at different way. An
Yeah.
operation teams, they look at it totally different way. So,
Yeah.
so
So these are all like
so
things we need to consider when I'm doing any of these solutions.
yeah. Otherwise, it's like you always. It's a kind of a rat hole where you don't restrict these things. It can go unlimited. I think multi-cluster copy can cover multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, you name it, everything in this scenario, right? So it's a
Yeah.
pretty broad topic. It's like sometimes it's really hard to get exact use cases Kyle was pointing out, right? What you're trying to solve with this thing. and everybody's definition is different. You talk about public cloud, multi-cluster service connectivity is different definition for them.
Well, even
Hybrid
talking
cloud,
public
different
cloud, what is that? There's different versions of that, right? It's not
yeah.
some magic thing, you know?
So, and everybody has their own solution, right? So hybrid cloud, this looks different. And then you have a private data center to data center, a
Yep.
Kubernetes cluster to Kubernetes cluster is different definition of these things, right? So the variables in this problem is like there are like 20 tunable parameter. You change something and you start looking different, right? So
Right.
so it's like it's hardcore, you want to kind of minimize that. Scope is going to be like it depends on which company you are talking to. Public cloud, their scope is limited. They don't talk about hybrid
Public
cloud.
cloud, which Kubernetes are you running? Which all the other
Yeah.
stuff are you running? I mean, it's an involved
And
conversation, you know?
which networking stack you are using, it's like everybody wants
Stacks,
to
there
know
might be multiple ones too,
stacks.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
then it's like like all the networking technology that is running on the host, you know, the scale and load is increasing every day. Kubernetes kind of made it like 20x more load on the same networking stack that you were using for OpenStack. But yeah, it's that need to change, right? And that's where I think we started exploring some of these technologies like eBPF and whether it can help us to scale it and kind of give us some breathing space for next 5 years to kind of take our customer to that point, right? So
Right.
yeah,
Well, I'll stop you there, Anil, because we're just about to hit up on time. But what I think we've learned
I told you
today
you have to
is that
stop me.
multi-cluster is definitely pretty nascent. Like it's not necessarily well defined, and the use cases aren't clear. But we can use smart bits of standards-based network technology to kind of glue all this stuff together in a way that's not necessarily Kubernetes specific, but will solve like
Yeah.
all of the problems for forevermore. So this definitely sounds like something worth digging into in a longer form episode, because I'd love to figure out where we're going to go with this. But really appreciate your time today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on yet another episode of the Net Podcast. And of course, thank you to our wonderful sponsor, T1 Nexus. So, Optics, you go check those guys out.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks
Thank you
for
for
listening.
inviting me.
Thanks, Anil.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.